When I moved in with my son, I thought I'd finally found peace. A quiet attic room, a warm family, and a place to rest after years of holding everyone together. But as the summer heat rolled in, I realized my room didn't even have a power outlet, while my grandson's gaming room downstairs had 3 air conditioners humming all day and night. I kept smiling, playing the role of the grateful guest. Little did they know, every sleepless night was another piece of my plan falling into place. And when the day came, I'd make sure they'd never see it coming. Mean Janviette Hook Song. My name is Mary Thompson, and at 58 years old, I thought I had weathered every storm life could throw at me. I had raised a son, buried a husband, and taught hundreds of children in a small-town elementary school. I'd been the one people came to when they needed a hand, the one who remembered every birthday, the one who cooked a little extra, just in case someone dropped by. My life had been full of service, sacrifice, and love. When my husband passed away, the house we had built together suddenly felt too big and too quiet. Every creak in the floorboards seemed to echo the absence of his footsteps. Eventually, the finances forced my hand. Maintaining the home was no longer possible. Selling it was heartbreaking, but I told myself I was moving toward a new chapter. That's when David, my only son, suggested I come live with him, his wife Lisa, and my 12-year-old grandson Alex. David's voice over the phone had been warm. "It'll be good, Mom. You won't be alone, and we'll all be together. You can spend time with Alex. We'll take care of you." I remember the relief I felt. After years of giving, perhaps this was my time to be taken care of. The day I arrived, the house felt alive. It was bigger than I imagined. A 2-story suburban home with a neat lawn and the kind of porch you'd see in a magazine. Lisa met me at the door, smiling brightly. "We're so happy to have you here, Mary," she said, taking my suitcase. Alex bounded down the stairs, hugging me before rushing off to show me the new game he'd been playing. David carried my smaller boxes in, chatting about how they'd made room for me in the attic space. "It's cozy up there, Mom. You'll have your own space, your own privacy, and you'll be close enough to the kitchen and living room so you won't feel cut off." That first evening felt almost magical. We sat together in the spacious living room, the soft hum of the air conditioner keeping the summer heat at bay. Lisa served a roast with garlic potatoes, Alex told me about school, and David asked about the old neighbors I'd left behind. For the first time in months, I felt the heavy knot of loneliness in my chest start to ease. As the days passed, I began to settle into a rhythm. Mornings started with coffee at the kitchen table, Lisa chatting about grocery lists while Alex got ready for school. I'd pack his lunch just like I used to pack David's, slipping in an extra cookie when Lisa wasn't looking. Old habits die hard. Afternoons were quiet. I'd read in the living room or take a walk in the neighborhood. Sometimes I'd tend to the small garden patch behind the house, planting marigolds because my husband always said they brought luck. Evenings were family time. We'd watch television together, eat dinner, and talk about our day. At first, I told myself I was lucky. Not every widow had a family willing to take her in. The room upstairs was small, yes, but it was mine. And when I stood at the top of the stairs and listened to the laughter drifting up from below, I felt connected. I remember one Saturday afternoon in particular. The sun streamed in through the wide living room windows, casting warm patterns across the hardwood floor. Lisa was in the kitchen making lemonade. Alex was sprawled on the carpet with his game console, and David was working on his laptop. I sat on the couch, watching them, feeling a wave of gratitude. In that moment, I thought, this is what family is meant to be, a place where we care for each other, a place where the burdens of life are shared. Looking back now, I realize that moment was the peak of my optimism. It was the high point of the emotional curve, when the audience would believe this was a simple story of family reunion. I believed it too. What I didn't know was that beneath the warm surface of those first weeks, tiny cracks had already begun to form, cracks I wouldn't see until much later. But for now, I was just a mother grateful to be home again, trusting that love and family would always be enough. Life in David's house had a comfortable pattern, at least in the beginning. David was the kind of son most people would envy, polite, attentive in his own way. Every morning before heading to work, he'd stop by the kitchen to check on me. "How's the attic treating you, Mom? Sleeping okay?" he'd ask, smiling as he poured his coffee. I would nod, telling him I was fine. He seemed genuinely concerned, but there was always a distance in his tone, as if his mind was already at his desk, surrounded by spreadsheets and code. David worked long hours in IT. His job, he often said, was demanding. I tried to be understanding. After all, I'd spent years juggling my own responsibilities when he was young. Lisa, on the other hand, was always around, but in a different way. She had a warm, charming personality, the kind that could put anyone at ease. "Mary, I don't know how you do it," she'd say when she saw me folding laundry or organizing the pantry. "You make everything so tidy. I could never keep this place in shape without you." Her compliments always came with a smile, and usually another request. It started small. Could I watch Alex while she ran errands? Could I help prep dinner while she handled a phone call? Soon, I found myself doing more and more around the house. Not that I minded. I loved keeping busy. But a small part of me noticed how easily my help became expected. Alex was my joy in those first weeks. At 12, he was energetic and full of life. He'd rush into my attic room after school, dropping his backpack and launching into stories about his classes. He was proud of his new gaming setup, which he said was the best in the neighborhood. "Grandma, you have to see it," he said one evening, pulling me by the hand to his room. I stepped inside and was struck by the sight. 3 sleek air conditioners mounted on the walls, a glowing tower PC, multiple monitors, and a chair that looked like it belonged in a spaceship. The room was cool and comfortable, a stark contrast to the stuffy attic where I stayed. I smiled and told him how impressive it was. In truth, I was glad he was happy. I didn't think too much about the disparity then. It was easy to chalk it up to different needs. After all, kids were kids. Lisa would sometimes poke her head into Alex's room, half laughing. "Don't spoil him too much, Mary. He already thinks he's royalty with all this." But there was pride in her voice, not caution. Evenings in the living room often felt like family portraits come to life. David would sit with his laptop on the coffee table. Lisa would scroll through her phone while chatting with me about neighbors or sales at the local store, and Alex would be curled up in the corner, headset on, laughing with his friends online. They included me in conversations in their own way. Lisa loved to talk about her family back in Oregon, her sister's wedding, her mother's garden. David sometimes reminisced about our old house, asking if I remembered the camping trips or the time we painted the kitchen yellow because I thought it would bring in more light. It felt like we were all getting used to each other again. There were moments of warmth, Lisa bringing me tea without asking, David buying my favorite brand of cookies on his grocery run. There were also moments I brushed aside, like when Lisa asked me to babysit Alex during her quick errands that lasted hours, or when David seemed to forget I might want to adjust the thermostat in the house. But to anyone looking in, this was a family that loved each other. Even I believed it. One Sunday evening, we all gathered for a barbecue in the backyard. David grilled burgers. Lisa set the table. Alex darted between us with a soccer ball. I sat on the patio, watching them, feeling the hum of contentment settle in my chest. In that moment, I didn't notice the small imbalances. I didn't think about how my room didn't have an air conditioner or how I never seemed to have a space truly my own. All I saw was family. Looking back now, I can see how perfectly this would fool an outsider. Even the audience might believe everything was fine. And that was the beauty and danger of those early days. They were a warm, inviting curtain, hiding the first cracks forming just out of sight. The attic was meant to be my sanctuary, or at least that's how David described it. When I first stepped inside, I noticed the slanted ceilings, the single small window, and the faint smell of insulation. It was furnished simply: a twin bed, a dresser, and a lamp on a nightstand. There was no closet, no chair, and more importantly, no electrical outlet in reach. When I mentioned it, David smiled in that easy way of his. "The wiring up here is old, Mom. We figured it's safer this way. Besides, Alex needs the downstairs bedroom for his studying and projects. It's quieter down there for him." At the time, it didn't sound unreasonable. Alex was a growing boy. School was important, and I told myself I could make do without a fan or a place to charge my phone nearby. But as the summer wore on, the attic began to trap the heat, and the absence of an outlet became more than a minor inconvenience. It was a daily reminder of where I stood in the hierarchy of the house. Lisa was kind in the beginning, or at least she seemed to be. She would cook large dinners that smelled wonderful, and she often offered me a plate before the family sat down together. But there were small lapses. One evening, I came down for dinner only to find the table cleared, dishes washed, and Lisa saying, "Oh, I thought you weren't hungry tonight. I saved you something in the fridge." It was a small portion in a plastic container, cold and unseasoned. I told myself it was a misunderstanding. Alex, who used to burst into my room to tell me about his day, started visiting less often. His afternoons were now spent in his gaming room, the hum of air conditioners audible even from the attic stairs. I still saw him at dinner or in passing, but his attention was fixed on his friends online, not on our little conversations. I brushed these moments aside. Families go through phases, I told myself. Lisa was busy running the household, Alex was growing up, David was buried in work. It was natural. But somewhere in the quiet moments, those long afternoons when the attic felt stifling and the house below buzzed with activity, I began to feel a shift. Then came the envelope. It arrived one Tuesday morning with the rest of the mail. Lisa had picked it up from the mailbox, flipping through bills and letters as she walked back inside. I was in the kitchen making tea when she froze for half a second, holding a thick white envelope with a bold government seal on it. "What's that?" I asked, more out of habit than suspicion. "Oh, just some paperwork," Lisa said quickly, tucking it under a magazine. Her voice was light, but her movements were tight, controlled. Later that afternoon, when Lisa left to run errands, I was tidying up the dining table when the magazine slipped to the floor. The envelope slid out with it. My name wasn't on it, it was addressed to Lisa, but the return address was from the County Social Services Department. The printed words under the seal caught my eye: Elder Care Support Program. I stood there for a long moment, the hum of the refrigerator filling the silence. Elder care support? I hadn't applied for anything like that. I placed the envelope back exactly where I'd found it. I told myself not to jump to conclusions, but a quiet unease settled in my chest. Over the next few days, little things began to stand out more. Lisa seemed more guarded when I was around. David was pleasant but distracted. I overheard half conversations about bills, expenses, and just a few more weeks until it's handled. None of it was overtly sinister, but it added to the growing list of things I couldn't quite ignore. I wanted to believe it was nothing, that these were just quirks of living together again after so many years apart. But a small voice in the back of my mind whispered that there was more beneath the surface. The attic still felt like my space, but it no longer felt like my home. The summer heat had been building for days, pressing down on the house like a heavy blanket. By nightfall, the attic felt unbearable. The small window offered no breeze, just thick, unmoving air. I lay in bed, sheets pushed aside, sweat dampening my nightgown. I checked the time on my phone, 11:47 p.m., and sighed. Sleep wasn't coming tonight. My head ached, my skin felt sticky, and the silence of the attic was broken only by the faint hum of the house below. I finally swung my legs over the side of the bed, deciding a glass of cold water might help. I tiptoed down the narrow staircase, careful not to wake anyone. But halfway down, I noticed something strange. A faint blue light glowing from the hallway below, accompanied by a low, mechanical hum. I followed the sound and stopped outside Alex's gaming room. The door was open just enough for me to see inside. 3 air conditioners were mounted on the walls, all running at full blast. The temperature inside must have been close to winter. Frosty, comfortable, luxurious. Alex sat in front of his computer, headset on, talking and laughing with friends online. His voice was cheerful, his cheeks slightly flushed from excitement, not from heat. The screens lit up his face in shifting colors from the game, and his chair spun as he leaned to grab a soda from the mini fridge tucked beside the desk. I stood there in the hallway, a wave of realization washing over me. My attic room was sweltering, without a single outlet for a fan, while downstairs this room, his game room, was chilled like a private paradise. I felt my stomach twist, not from jealousy of my grandson's comfort, but from the clarity of what it meant. This house wasn't arranged around fairness or need. It was arranged around priorities, and I wasn't one of them. I turned away quietly, intending to head back upstairs, when I nearly bumped into Lisa. She appeared from the kitchen holding a glass of iced tea. "Oh, Mary couldn't sleep," she asked softly, her voice smooth and casual, as if we had just met in the middle of a sunny afternoon. "It's hot upstairs," I admitted, forcing a smile. "I thought I'd get some water." Lisa nodded sympathetically. "The attic does get warm. We've been meaning to see if there's a portable fan we could use up there. I'll check the garage this weekend." She smiled again, but there was no urgency in her tone, no sense that my discomfort was a problem worth solving tonight or even soon. Before I could respond, David appeared from the living room where he'd apparently been working late. "Everything okay?" he asked, glancing between us. "It's fine," Lisa answered for me, her tone light. "Mary just couldn't sleep. The attic's a little warm." David nodded absently. "Yeah, summers are tough up there. We'll figure something out." His voice was kind, but his eyes were already drifting back to the glow of his laptop. No one suggested adjusting the thermostat. No one suggested I stay in the cooler guest room for the night. No one even turned down one of the 3 air conditioners running in the room next to us. I excused myself and went into the kitchen for water. The cold glass felt good in my hands, but there was a hollowness inside me I couldn't ignore. I could hear Alex's laughter drifting from the game room and the steady hum of cold air circulating through a space filled with comfort and care. None of it mine. I climbed the attic stairs slowly, the glass of water in hand. Each step felt heavier than the last. It wasn't just the heat pressing down on me anymore. It was something heavier. The realization that the comfort of this home, the kindness I thought I'd stepped into, had limits. When I reached my room, I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the dark ceiling. I told myself not to make it bigger than it was. Families make compromises. Maybe they hadn't realized how bad the heat was. Maybe next week would be different. But deep down, a small voice, the one I'd been ignoring since I arrived, whispered that this wasn't an accident. The attic was meant to keep me out of the way, to keep me comfortable enough to be present, but never comfortable enough to belong. That night, lying awake in the thick, heavy air, I realized something important. This wasn't my home, not in the way I thought it was. The next morning, sunlight poured through the small attic window, but it brought no relief. The air was already heavy with heat, and my sleep had been fitful at best. I told myself that perhaps if I mentioned it calmly, David and Lisa might reconsider my situation. At breakfast, Lisa was at the stove flipping pancakes, her hair tied back neatly. David scrolled through his phone at the table, sipping his coffee. Alex was still upstairs in his room, the faint sound of his game chatter drifting down. "Lisa," I began gently, taking a seat at the table. "It was quite warm in the attic last night. I hardly slept at all." Maybe we could look into a fan sooner rather than later? She glanced over her shoulder, smiling that practiced smile I'd come to know so well. Oh, Mary, I'm so sorry. The attic does get warm in summer, but you know how it is. Electricity costs are through the roof this year. We've been trying to keep usage low. Her tone was light, but there was no real sympathy in her voice. Just a rehearsed ease, the kind of response that shuts down a conversation without sounding unkind. I nodded slowly, forcing a polite smile. I understand. David looked up briefly from his phone. We'll figure something out, Mom. Maybe we can check the garage for an old fan. But his attention slid back to his phone before I could respond. That was it. No urgency, no suggestion of change, just the expectation that I would make do. I tried to swallow the knot in my throat, but the feeling lingered. Their words weren't cruel, but there was something colder in what they didn't say, something in the quiet dismissal of my discomfort. After breakfast, I returned to the attic. I sat on the bed, staring at the single window, the light streaming in like a spotlight on my own foolishness. I thought about the promises David had made when he'd asked me to move in. You won't be alone, Mom. We'll take care of you. I had believed him. I had wanted to believe him. And yet here I was sitting in a stifling attic, carefully managing my tone so I wouldn't seem like a burden. I thought back to my old house. It wasn't grand, but it had been mine. Every room, every corner carried my mark. And then I remembered the paperwork, the day David had come to me years ago, asking if he could use the house as collateral for a business loan. It's just temporary, Mom, he had said back then. Everything's under control. You won't have to worry about a thing. I hadn't worried. I had trusted him. I signed where he told me to sign, confident my son had my best interests at heart. Now, sitting in the attic, the memory didn't feel so harmless. I began to wonder, had that been the first time my trust had been taken for granted? Was this just another step in a pattern I'd been too blind to see? The thought was uncomfortable, so I pushed it aside. I told myself not to assume the worst. Families make compromises. It was just a hot summer, not a conspiracy. And yet, there was something in Lisa's smile that lingered in my mind, the way she'd said, "You know how it is," as though my discomfort was a minor inconvenience in the grand scheme of their lives. That afternoon, I busied myself with chores. Anything to keep from sitting in the attic. I helped Lisa fold laundry, I watered the plants, I even reorganized the pantry. Lisa thanked me warmly for the help, but the underlying imbalance didn't go unnoticed. By evening, as I sat at the dinner table listening to Alex talk about his game and David talk about work, I felt the quiet weight of something shifting inside me. I still wanted to believe this was just a misunderstanding, that my son and his wife truly cared, but the doubt was there now, subtle, persistent, like a splinter you can't quite reach. And beneath it all, a new thought began to take shape. If the attic was only the beginning, what else was I not seeing? A week after that stifling night, the attic felt even hotter, but it wasn't the heat that kept me awake now. It was something colder, sharper, a quiet sense of unease I couldn't shake. One afternoon, while Lisa thought I was upstairs reading, I came down to put away laundry. As I passed the hallway, I heard her voice from the kitchen. She was on the phone, her tone hushed but urgent. "Yes, I understand," she said, her voice low. "But the paperwork has to be in his name before the end of the month. We can't keep delaying this. The house is still under Mary's name right now, but yes, I know the risks. I'm handling it." I froze. My hand hovered over the laundry basket. The house is still under Mary's name. My house? The one I sold? Or did she mean something else? I took a step closer, careful not to make a sound. Lisa's voice tightened. "No, David doesn't want her to know until everything is settled. We'll make it look natural. She trusts us." My chest tightened, each word heavy and deliberate. Lisa paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. Then she said softly, "Once the name is changed, we can deal with the rest. Just, keep it quiet." A chair scraped softly on the floor as she stood. I slipped back into the hallway, heart pounding. I ducked into the laundry room, pretending to organize towels. A moment later, Lisa passed by with her phone in hand, smiling faintly as though nothing unusual had happened. I tried to busy myself, but my thoughts wouldn't stop racing. What paperwork? What name change? That evening at dinner, I studied their faces. David was calm, chatting about a project at work. Lisa laughed at Alex's stories, her hands moving gracefully as she served pasta. Nothing about them suggested deceit, yet I couldn't unhear those words. Later, in the attic, I sat on the bed staring at the slanted ceiling. The house is still under Mary's name. Did she mean my old home? I had trusted David when he'd used it as collateral. I hadn't asked questions when he told me it was handled. But now, the phrase, "we can't keep delaying this," replayed in my mind. The next day, I made a point to linger around the mailbox when the mail arrived. Lisa collected it as usual, but I noticed she flipped through quickly, pulling aside a thick envelope and tucking it into her purse before walking inside. Her movements weren't careless. They were deliberate. That evening, I decided to test the waters. "Lisa," I said casually as we cleaned up after dinner, "I heard you talking about paperwork the other day. Is everything all right?" Her smile didn't falter. "Oh, just boring house stuff. Insurance forms, you know how complicated they make everything." Her voice was easy, but there was a flicker in her eyes. Just a brief moment, like she was measuring how much I knew. I returned her smile and said nothing more. That night in bed, the attic felt even smaller. The quiet wasn't peaceful anymore. It was suffocating. The audience, if they were here with me, would feel the shift. This wasn't just an overheard conversation. This was the first crack in the surface that showed something larger beneath. I began to wonder, had I stepped into a home that wanted me here, or into a plan that only worked as long as I stayed quiet and uninformed? That night, the attic felt different. It wasn't just heat or discomfort. It was the sense of being surrounded by a truth I hadn't yet fully uncovered. Lisa's phone call kept looping in my head. The house is still under Mary's name. We can't keep delaying this. I tried to tell myself there was another explanation, but years of teaching had given me a good instinct for when someone wasn't telling the whole story. I needed to see for myself. The next afternoon, when the house was quiet, David at work, Lisa running errands, Alex at school, I went down to the living room. My hands trembled slightly as I opened the small storage cabinet near the stairs, where I had kept a few of my personal files. Most of my important documents were stacked neatly in a folder: my will, my teaching retirement papers, my bank statements. And there, at the bottom, was the manila envelope I hadn't looked at in years. Inside were the closing papers for the sale of my old house, loan agreements, and an assortment of bank notices. I sifted through looking for anything that might explain what Lisa had meant, and then I saw it. A copy of a lien agreement from 3 years ago. My name was listed as the primary property owner, with David as co-signer. The property had been used as collateral for a loan. My stomach dropped. I remembered that conversation now. David coming to me, talking about a short-term loan for a business opportunity, assuring me there was no risk. He had said it was already under control, but stapled to the agreement was a more recent letter from the bank. It wasn't a foreclosure notice, not yet, but it was a warning. The loan was in arrears. Several payments were overdue. My hands tightened around the paper. So that's what Lisa meant. If the payments weren't made soon, the property, the one still legally in my name, could be seized. It felt like the floor shifted beneath me. For a long moment, I just sat there, the papers spread across my lap, my mind trying to assemble the timeline. David hadn't told me any of this. He hadn't even hinted there was a problem. And Lisa was talking about changing the name on the house, perhaps before the bank could act. The thought made my chest ache. I wanted to believe it was a misunderstanding, that David was just too proud to ask for help, that Lisa was trying to fix things quietly. But another part of me, colder, sharper, wondered if they were protecting themselves at my expense. I put the papers back carefully, exactly as I'd found them. I needed them to stay where they were until I knew what to do next. That evening, I watched them both more closely. David came home late, tired, distracted. Lisa was cheerful, almost too cheerful as she plated dinner. They spoke to me kindly, as always, but there was a distance, something measured in their tone, as if every word was chosen carefully. Over the next few days, I made quiet efforts to gather more information. While Lisa was at the grocery store, I checked the family computer in the living room. I didn't know all of David's passwords, but the bank's website was saved in the browser. I couldn't log in, but I could see the warning banner when the page loaded, bright red letters indicating delinquent account. It confirmed what I already suspected. The loan wasn't just behind, it was in trouble. The twist that followed wasn't one of relief, but of sharp clarity. If the payments weren't made, the bank could take the house. And if the name was switched before that, whoever held the title could lose everything. That night, lying in the attic, I realized the danger wasn't just discomfort or feeling like a guest in my own family's home. This was about my security, my stability, everything I had worked for. The audience, if they were here, would feel it too. The rising tension, the slow climb towards something bigger. My role in this family wasn't just being minimized, it was being leveraged. And I had to decide whether to stay quiet or take action before it was too late. After finding the lien agreement and the bank's warning, I thought I had seen the worst of it. But life has a way of showing you that the bottom is always a little lower than you expect. The discovery came a few days later, on an afternoon when the house was quiet again. Lisa had taken Alex to a friend's birthday party, and David was at work. I was folding laundry in the living room when the mail slot clinked. I sorted through the envelopes, bills, advertisements, and one thick, official-looking packet addressed to Lisa. The seal caught my eye, Department of Social Services. I hesitated. The polite thing to do was to leave it untouched, but the polite thing had kept me blind for too long. I opened it carefully, just enough to slide the papers out. The first page was a summary of benefits. Elder Care Assistance Program. Under Care Recipient, my name was listed. Under Caregivers, David Thompson and Lisa Thompson. My eyes scanned the numbers. Monthly disbursements. Additional payments for home modifications and wellness resources. The totals weren't small, and then my stomach sank as I read the breakdown. A recent claim for $4,800 labeled Home Environment Upgrade. Home Environment Upgrade? My attic room hadn't been upgraded. Nothing about my space had changed since I arrived. I didn't need to think long about where the money had gone. My eyes drifted toward Alex's gaming room, with its 3 air conditioners, expensive chair, and glowing screens. I set the papers down slowly, my hands shaking. The realization wasn't just about money, it was about the truth. My presence in this house was not just tolerated, it was profitable. I replaced the papers exactly as I had found them and returned to the attic. The air felt thicker than ever, pressing down on me like the weight of the truth itself. That night, I couldn't sleep. My thoughts spun back to every kind smile, every warm word, every promise of care. How much of it was genuine, and how much was just a performance to keep the benefits flowing? The answer came sooner than I expected. The next evening, as I passed by the kitchen, I heard David speaking on the phone in the living room. His voice was low, serious. I might have walked on, but then I caught the words that froze me in place. I know she won't like it, but the assisted living facility is the best option right now. We can't keep the house and the debt like this. Once Mom is settled, we can move forward with the sale. My breath caught in my chest. Assisted living facility. Sale. David listened for a moment, then continued. Yes, the property is still in her name. That's why we need to move quickly before the bank steps in. She'll be taken care of, but we can't keep waiting. I felt as if the floor had disappeared beneath me. So this was the plan. I wasn't just an afterthought in this house. I was an obstacle, and the solution was to move me somewhere out of sight so they could do what they wanted with the rest of my property. The audience, if they were here, would feel it too. The sharp drop of the emotional curve, the moment when all illusions crumble. I backed away quietly, my heart pounding. In the attic, I sat on the bed in the stifling air, my mind spinning. Every piece of kindness from the past weeks replayed in my head, but now the scenes were different. The smiles felt rehearsed, the invitations to dinner, the small talk, the offers to help. It all felt like part of a larger play. It wasn't just about heat or comfort anymore. It wasn't even just about the loan. It was about my independence, my home, my life being quietly signed away while I smiled politely at the dinner table. For the first time since moving in, I wasn't just hurt. I was angry. And anger, I realized, was exactly what I needed. That night, lying in the suffocating attic, I realized I couldn't confront them outright. Not yet. Anger was hot and dangerous, but I needed it to cool into something sharper. If David and Lisa believed I was unaware, that was my advantage. And if they thought I trusted them enough to sign anything they put in front of me, that was the key I could use. The next morning, I came down to breakfast with a smile. David was sipping coffee. Lisa was scrolling through her phone. Alex half listening with his headphones on. I sat at the table and said, as if in casual conversation, "David, I know times have been hard. I overheard you talking about the loan the other day. If there's something I can do to help, paperwork I can sign, or anything that will ease the burden, I'm happy to." David looked up, surprised, then quickly masked it with a practiced smile. "Mom, you don't need to worry about that. We're handling it." Lisa chimed in, her tone carefully measured. "That's very generous, Mary. There may be some forms later that need your signature, but will only involve you if it's absolutely necessary." I nodded, as though I were reassured. Inside, I noted every word. They wanted me compliant, but not informed. Perfect. That afternoon, when the house emptied out, David at work, Lisa running errands, Alex at a friend's, I took the bus into town. I walked into the office of an attorney I had known from years ago, a man who had helped me handle my late husband's estate. His name was Mr. Reynolds, and he still recognized me. "Mary," he said warmly, shaking my hand, "it's been a long time. What can I help you with?" I closed the office door behind me. I need to protect my property, and I need to do it quietly. Over the next hour, I explained everything. The old house, the loan, the arrears, the overheard conversations about an assisted living facility. Mr. Reynolds listened carefully, his pen moving quickly across his legal pad. "First," he said, "the property is still legally in your name. That's good. We can transfer it into a trust that you control entirely. That way, no changes can be made without your approval. Second, any benefits being claimed in your name without your direct consent are problematic. We can address that, but it may take time." "I don't want to fight," I told him. "I just want to make sure I can't be pushed out of my home or have my assets taken without my say." He nodded. "Then we'll prepare the documents for the trust immediately. You'll sign, I'll file them, and it will be done before anyone realizes." Over the next few days, I found reasons to leave the house during the day, each time meeting briefly with Mr. Reynolds to sign paperwork. I kept my demeanor at home, calm, almost cheerful. At dinner, I'd ask David about work, Lisa about her garden, Alex about school. I laughed at their jokes, nodded at their reassurances. I made sure to appear exactly as they wanted me to be. Agreeable, trusting, uninvolved. Inside, my plan was solidifying. One evening, as I dried dishes with Lisa, she said lightly, "Mary, we may have a few documents coming in from the bank next week, just standard loan stuff. I'll go over them with you when they arrive." I smiled, handing her a clean glass. "Of course, dear. Whatever you need." The audience, if they were here, would see the shift, the tension coiling beneath the surface, the calm before the reversal. By the end of the week, the trust was complete. The property was now protected, entirely under my control. Any attempt to sell or transfer it without my consent would be legally impossible. Now, all I had to do was wait for the moment to reveal what I had done. It was a Thursday morning when I decided the time had come. The papers were signed, the trust was secure, and the only thing left was to let the story play out. I came down to breakfast with my brightest smile. "David," I said, setting a pot of coffee on the table. "I was thinking, we haven't had a proper family dinner in a while. Why don't I cook something special on Saturday, a big dinner, all of us together?" David looked surprised for a moment. Then his expression softened. "That sounds nice, Mom. What's the occasion?" "No occasion," I replied lightly. "I just want us all to enjoy a good meal. We've been so busy lately." Lisa chimed in, her voice sweet. "That's a wonderful idea, Mary. We'll clear our schedules." As I walked back to the attic, I could almost feel the shift in the air. They believed the dinner was a perfect opportunity. Perhaps to finally put those papers in front of me, perhaps to cement whatever plan they thought was still hidden. Saturday came quickly. I spent the afternoon in the kitchen, preparing roast chicken, mashed potatoes, fresh rolls, and apple pie. The smell filled the house, warm and inviting. I hummed to myself as I worked, my hands steady despite the undercurrent of tension. David came in from the backyard wearing a collared shirt instead of his usual weekend t-shirt. Lisa wore a soft floral dress, her hair styled carefully. They looked prepared. Lisa glanced at me as she set the table. "This looks amazing, Mary. You didn't have to go to all this trouble." "Oh, I wanted to," I said, arranging the silverware. "It's not often we all sit down together like this." David brought out a folder from the living room, placing it discreetly on the buffet beside the dining table. I noticed the edge of the bank's logo peeking from the corner of the papers. The audience, if they were here, would see the moment clearly. The setup of the trap. David and Lisa, confident. Me, calm but aware. As we sat down to eat, the conversation flowed easily at first. Alex talked about a science project, Lisa complimented the seasoning on the chicken, David asked about my old neighbors. The food was good, the laughter sounded genuine, but there was a current underneath, something almost electric in its tension. Halfway through the meal, David reached for the folder. "Mom," he said gently, "there's something we should talk about. It's nothing urgent, but there are some forms that could help us simplify things, make sure everything is taken care of." Lisa nodded, her smile perfectly measured. "It's just to make things easier for you, Mary, with the bank, with the property. We'll handle all the details. You just have to sign." I set my fork down, my expression calm. "Of course," I said softly. "We can look at it after dinner." Inside, my pulse was steady. Everything was exactly as I had expected. The meal continued, but now every bite, every sip was part of a carefully staged moment. I poured more wine, offered seconds, laughed at Alex's jokes. I wanted them comfortable, confident. The audience would feel it too, the false calm, the sense that something was about to snap. As we cleared the table, Lisa moved the folder to the center. David opened it, sliding the papers toward me with a pen. "Whenever you're ready, Mom. This will make everything so much easier." I smiled, my hands resting on the table. "Yes," I said. "I think it's time we go over everything. Together." They didn't know it yet, but the moment they thought they had been preparing for was about to turn upside down. David slid the folder across the table with a practiced calm, the pen lying neatly on top. "It's just a few signatures, Mom," he said, his voice even but expectant. "Everything will be easier once the property is in our names. The bank will have fewer questions, and you won't have to worry about any of the details." Lisa's smile was steady, but her eyes were sharp. "You've done so much for us, Mary. Let us take care of this. It's just a formality." I looked down at the stack of papers, my fingers resting lightly on the edge. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the air conditioner in the hallway. Alex was in the living room, the sound of his game, muffled, unaware of the tension building just a room away. I took a slow breath. "Before we sign anything," I said softly, "I think there's something we should all look at." David tilted his head, confused. Lisa's smile faltered just a fraction. I reached into my bag and pulled out a thick envelope. "I went to see Mr. Reynolds last week. You remember him. He handled your father's estate. I thought it might be wise to review my assets before making any changes." David's jaw tightened slightly. "Mom, you didn't have to do that. We've already arranged everything." I held up a hand. "And I've arranged everything too." I slid the documents across the table. The top page bore the official seal of the county recorder's office. "This," I said evenly, "is proof that the property in question has been sold. The proceeds have been deposited into a personal trust under my name only, a trust that cannot be altered, transferred, or accessed by anyone else." Lisa blinked, her fingers tightening on the edge of the table. "Mary, what do you mean the property has been sold? We didn't—" "You didn't," I interrupted, my voice calm but firm. "I did, quietly, legally, completely. And every cent is secure in a trust that you cannot touch." The silence that followed was heavy, almost tangible. David leaned forward, his voice low. "Mom, you don't understand. The bank—" "I understand perfectly," I said, locking eyes with him. "I understand there was a lien on my property. I understand the loan is in arrears. I also understand that there were discussions about moving me into an assisted living facility to make the sale easier." Lisa's face paled. "That's not—" "Please," I said, my voice cutting through hers. "Don't insult me further. I've lived in this attic, I've overheard enough, and I've seen the paperwork. I know about the elder care assistance program. I know about the home upgrades that ended up in Alex's gaming room. I know everything." The audience, if they were here, would feel the sharp climb of the emotional curve, the sudden reversal, the twist they hadn't seen coming in full. David sat back, stunned into silence. Lisa's composure cracked, her hands twisting in her lap. "Mary, we were only trying to—" "You were trying to make things easier for yourselves," I finished for her. "And that's fine. I'm not here to punish you. I'm here to protect myself, which I have." I gathered the folder they had placed before me, closed it, and pushed it back toward them. "There's nothing here for me to sign. There's nothing left to transfer. Everything has already been handled." For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The sound of Alex's game drifted faintly from the living room, a stark contrast to the silence at the table. David finally exhaled, a sound that was half defeat, half disbelief. "So that's it then?" "That's it," I said calmly. "I've secured my future, and now I'll secure my peace of mind." The audience in that moment would feel the surge, the climb from what they thought was certain defeat to unexpected victory. The silence at the table lingered, thick and unmoving. Lisa glanced at David, but he didn't meet her eyes. I let the pause stretch, knowing the weight of what I'd just revealed needed to settle in. Finally, I broke the silence. "There's one more thing," I said, my tone even. "I've made arrangements to move into a new apartment. It's quiet, comfortable, and entirely mine. I'll be moving out next week." Lisa's lips parted, as if to protest, but I held up my hand. "You don't need to worry about me. The rent is paid in advance for the year, and I'll be fine. I think we all know this living situation hasn't been working. Not for me and not for you." David leaned back in his chair, rubbing his forehead. "Mom, you don't have to do that. We can still—" "No," I interrupted gently. "This isn't about what we can or can't do. This is about what's right for me. And right now, I need space. I need to live somewhere I'm not an obligation, a burden, or a financial asset." The audience, if they were here, would feel the quiet satisfaction in my voice, the sense of control shifting entirely. Lisa's eyes dropped to the table. "Mary, we didn't mean for things to—" "I know what you meant," I said, my voice still calm. "And that's why I'm leaving without anger. I'm simply choosing not to be in a position where my comfort and my future depend on someone else's plans." The words landed like stones in the silence. Over the next week, I began packing my things. The attic, which had felt like a prison during the hottest nights of summer, now felt like a temporary station before freedom. I boxed up my books, my photo albums, the few pieces of furniture that were truly mine. Lisa was quiet, almost subdued. She avoided long conversations, her usual bright tone replaced with short, polite remarks. David was more distracted than usual, and when the phone rang, I noticed he hesitated before answering, as if the calls were no longer bringing solutions. On Thursday, I overheard them talking in the kitchen. "We're going to have to adjust," David said, his voice low. "The loan isn't going to pay itself, and without her here, the benefits—" "I know," Lisa said sharply. "We'll figure something out, we always do." There was a tension in their voices now, a crack in the confident facade they'd worn for weeks. On moving day, I carried the last of my boxes down to the front hall. David offered to drive me to the new apartment, but I shook my head. "I've arranged for a taxi. I'll be fine." Lisa stood by the door, her smile polite but tight. "I hope you'll be happy there, Mary." "I will be," I said simply, "and I hope things work out for you, too." As the taxi pulled away, I looked back at the house one last time. There was no anger, no bitterness, just relief. The weight I'd been carrying since the attic's first sweltering night lifted as the distance grew. The audience in that moment would feel the satisfaction. Justice served, balance restored. In the weeks that followed, I heard from a mutual friend that David and Lisa were struggling financially. The loan payments were still overdue, and without the extra benefits, their budget had tightened dramatically. I didn't feel vindictive, but there was a certain peace in knowing the balance had shifted, not out of spite, but out of necessity. In my new apartment, the air was cool, the windows open. For the first time in months, I slept through the night without waking in discomfort. I cooked for myself, decorated the space with my own things, and filled my days with quiet routines that were mine alone. The story wasn't about revenge. It was about reclaiming my life, and in that, I had succeeded. The first morning in my new apartment felt different from any morning I'd had in months. I woke to the sound of birds outside the open window, the soft breeze slipping through the curtains. The air was cool, the room was mine, and for the first time in a long time, I didn't feel like a guest in someone else's home. The apartment wasn't large, just 2 bedrooms, a small kitchen, and a balcony that caught the morning sun, but it was enough. More than enough. It was my space, arranged how I liked, without anyone rearranging it or suggesting a better use for it. I spent the first week unpacking at my own pace, placing photo frames on shelves, stacking books on the coffee table, and filling the kitchen with the scents of fresh bread and homemade soup. My neighbors stopped by to introduce themselves, an older woman named Carol from down the hall who invited me to the building's weekly book club, and a retired couple, Jim and Susan, who offered to take me along to the community garden on Saturdays. I said yes to all of it. For years, my life had been centered on the needs of others, my husband, my son, my grandson. Now I was learning how to center it on myself. In the weeks that followed, my days filled with small joys. On Mondays, I went to the library to choose a new stack of books. On Wednesdays, I met with the book club, where we drank tea and debated over characters we loved or despised. On Saturdays, I worked in the garden, planting marigolds and tomatoes, trading recipes with Susan. Life was quiet, but it was full. Meanwhile, I heard bits and pieces about David and Lisa. A mutual friend mentioned that the bank had contacted them again. Without the elder care benefits and without my presence, the household budget was tight. David had taken on extra hours at work, and Lisa had started a part-time job at a local boutique. I didn't gloat when I heard this. I didn't feel the sharp satisfaction I might have expected. Instead, I felt something gentler, relief that they were finally taking responsibility for themselves. Then, one afternoon, I received a surprise. Alex called. His voice was quieter than I remembered, less animated. "Grandma, it's me. I wanted to see how you're doing." My heart softened instantly. "I'm doing well, sweetheart. How's school?" "It's okay," he said. There was a pause before he added, "I miss you. The house feels different without you there." I smiled, even though he couldn't see it. "I miss you, too. You can come visit me anytime. I have plenty of space, and there's a bookstore down the street I think you'd love." He hesitated again. "I didn't know about everything. Mom and Dad didn't tell me much, but I know you always took care of me." The sincerity in his voice touched me deeply. "That's what grandmas do," I said gently, "and we can still spend time together. You just let me know when you want to come by." We spoke for a few more minutes before he hung up, promising to visit soon. When I put down the phone, I felt a warmth I hadn't expected. The audience, if they were here, would feel it too. The slow climb of the emotional curve, from the cold tension of confrontation to the warm promise of connection. Over the next month, Alex came by twice. The first time, we baked cookies in my small kitchen, just like we used to. The second time, we walked to the park and sat by the pond, talking about his school projects and his plans for the future. I didn't ask questions about David or Lisa. This wasn't about the past anymore. It was about building something new, something genuine. At the community center, I became more involved. I volunteered to help organize the annual charity sale, taught a children's reading hour once a month, and even agreed to lead a gardening workshop. My days were full, my evenings peaceful, and my nights restful. Sometimes, when I sat on my balcony with a cup of tea, I thought about the attic, the hot, airless room that had once felt like my place in the family. Now it felt like a distant memory, one that no longer held power over me. David and Lisa, I knew, were still finding their balance. There were no more surprise calls asking for my signature, no more quiet conversations about simplifying things. And I was glad for that. They had their own path to walk now without leaning on me as a silent safety net. In my new life, I found something I hadn't realized I'd lost, not just independence, but dignity. And as the seasons turned, my little apartment became a home, not because of its size or its furniture, but because it was mine. As autumn settled in, my days began to take on a rhythm that felt both familiar and new. The air grew crisp. The leaves outside my balcony turned gold and red, and the little apartment I now called home seemed to gather more warmth each day. One afternoon, Carol from down the hall convinced me to join a storytelling session at the community center. "You've lived quite a life, Mary," she said. "People could learn from your experiences." At first I hesitated. My story felt personal, private even. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't just about me. It was about so many others who had quietly given and given, only to find themselves diminished in the spaces they once thought were safe. So one Thursday evening, I stood in front of a circle of neighbors and told my story. I spoke about losing my husband, selling my house, and moving in with my son's family. I described the attic room, how small and hot it had been in the summer, how I'd tried to convince myself it was fine. I spoke of the little signs that something was off, the forgotten meals, the overheard conversations, the papers that needed my signature. And then I told them about the turning point, the moment I realized I had to stop being a passive guest in my own life, how I had quietly taken steps to secure my property, to protect my future, and to move into a place where I could live on my own terms. I ended with a simple thought. Don't let your kindness turn into an obligation that others feel entitled to. Family love is real, but it is not a reason to give away your independence. Protect your dignity. Protect your future, even from those you love. The room was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then slowly there was a ripple of applause. A few women came up afterward to thank me, some with tears in their eyes. One said, "I wish I'd heard this before I signed my house over to my son." Another whispered, "You gave me courage." I walked home that evening feeling lighter, as if by telling my story I'd released the last bit of weight I'd been carrying. A week later, I received something unexpected in the mail, a plain envelope with my name written in familiar handwriting. Inside was a letter from Alex. "Dear Grandma, I'm sorry for everything that happened. I didn't understand it all when you were living here. I thought things were fine, but now I see you were the only one who ever made me feel like I mattered just for being me. I miss your cookies and your stories. Mom and Dad don't talk about what happened, but I think about it a lot. I want to come visit you. I hope that's okay. Love, Alex." I read the letter twice, my heart tightening with each word. It wasn't a full reconciliation, but it was a start. The audience, if they were here, would feel the gentle rise in the emotional curve, the hint that not all bridges are burned, that healing is possible in time. I wrote back that evening, keeping my response simple. "Dear Alex, you're welcome here anytime. I still make cookies. And there's a bookstore nearby that I think you'd love. Let me know when you'd like to visit. Love, Grandma." A few days later, he called. His voice was lighter than I'd heard in months. We made plans for him to come by the following weekend. As I hung up the phone, I stood by the balcony, looking out at the city lights. Life hadn't gone the way I'd imagined when I first moved into David's house, but it had brought me here, to a place of peace, independence, and the freedom to open my door to family on my own terms. The story wasn't about revenge. It was about boundaries, dignity, and love that didn't require self-sacrifice to survive. And as the cool autumn breeze drifted through my apartment, I knew I had done the right thing.